Are you a course creator wondering how to build a sustainable business around your unique expertise? Even if it doesn't seem like it might be a natural fit for the online space, imagine finding a way to turn your years of professional experience into a trusted educational brand that serves people worldwide. Today, we are diving into Amelia Lee's story. She started as an architect, and nearly a decade ago, she pivoted into online education, building a business that guides homeowners through home design and renovation. Amelia proves that even the most traditional skills can thrive in an online course business with the right strategy and commitment. You're listening to the Online Course Show, where we dive deep into the strategies that helps course creators build thriving businesses. I'm Jacques Hopkins, and after more than a decade building my own successful online course teaching piano, we brought in over $4 million and have over 10,000 students. I'm here to share lessons that I've learned along the way. Stick around, Amelia's journey might just be the inspiration you need. All right, let's jump into it. Amelia Lee's journey. She is the founder of Undercover Architect and has spent almost 10 years helping homeowners get their home renovations and builds right. I absolutely love this niche because we did a major renovation on our house a couple of years ago, and I didn't know what I didn't know. And we joked during the process, my wife and I, that we really could have used an online course about how to do this. Even though we hired a builder, a good builder, we didn't know what we were doing. And we would have been much better off had we learned how to be a homeowner during renovations. I wish I would have found Amelia much sooner. So from running an architectural practice to going all in with online courses, Amelia's story is filled with insights on making your mark in a niche where people might not even know they need your expertise until they find it. In today's conversation, you'll hear how she reached her audience, developed her programs, and grew her content to span multiple platforms, including her popular podcast. Plus, we talk about how her business has scaled with a signature program. She has supporting courses as well, and community-driven content that helps homeowners all over the world. Let's dive into that full conversation between myself and Amelia Lee. Hi, Amelia. Welcome to the Online Course Show.
Hi, Jacques. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Do you consider yourself a course creator?
It's an interesting question, actually. I consider myself an online educator. And I think part of me will always think of myself first as an architect because it's what I did first and it's how I still define myself. I still have my architectural registration. So, and it took a lot to be able to, there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through to legally call yourself an architect. And so, I think because that's the kind of the identity stamp first, that's the thing I always think of myself as first.
How long have you been an online educator?
Undercover Architect has now been running for almost 10 years. So it's 10 years next year. So that's sort of the beginning of my online education work.
I take it you were an architect and have been an architect leading up to that, right? So give us the high level view of transitioning or I guess, what are the things that led to you wanting to go into being an online educator?
So I've worked in architecture since 1993, and I worked through private practice and for a development company and all of those kinds of things. And I was co-owner of an architectural practice for 5 years. And in 2013, I travelled overseas with a not-for-profit called the Hunger Project and a women's organisation, Business Chicks, on a leadership and immersion program, and was away in Uganda for 2.5 weeks. And at the time, it really kind of gave my life a big shake-up about where I was going, what I wanted to do. I realised that I didn't want to build an architectural practice, and yet I was the co-owner of one, and I wanted to have a more flexible, family-centred life. And my husband and I, we'd always talked about living in the Byron hinterland. And so I came home from that trip and we relocated. And so that was about 10 years ago. And part of the move was figuring out what I was going to do next. And I felt like my husband and I, we'd renovated 3 houses over 12.5 years. We'd had a baby per renovation. All the kids had learned to climb ladders before they'd walked. I'd worked in development. I had qualifications in property economics. I had lots of sort of professional and personal expertise. And I felt like nobody was getting the information that they needed when they needed it to start their project well, unless they kind of lucked it with the right person. And so I just felt that it was the whole process when so much at stake with your own home, it's just too fraught for it to feel that risky and to be so reliant on a person. And I knew that an educated homeowner could make a massive difference to that process. I'd seen the work of the Hunger Project is all about empowerment through education. And so I came home, applied that to my own industry. And when we moved, I started basically building a website, started blogging. The online courses came very quickly at the end of 2014. So I started the business, around middle of 2014. And I say next week's my birthday for the business because the 29th of September 2014 was the first invoice I ever sent. So, and that first online course was basically taking people through the step-by-step process to navigate their renovation. And at that time, the whole world of online education was really foreign to me. But I just really wanted to help people understand better about how to navigate their projects well and how to create a great outcome in their home. If they were only going to do it once or twice in their life and it was going to have this long-lasting impact, then I wanted them to get it right the first time.
So congratulations on this big milestone coming up. I think earlier in the conversation, you actually said it'll be 10 years coming up next year. And I think you clarified it just now. It's actually next week. You're about to hit 10 years next week. And that's amazing. So by the time this comes out, you will have hit 10 years. And that's really amazing. So when you jumped in, you said you started with a blog. Why did you choose to go with a blog first?
I think that it just gave me the opportunity to start putting out information. As I'd come home from Uganda it was November 2013, and I knew that I wanted to do something different. I started looking around, and I looked at everything else but architecture. I looked at all sorts of other businesses and ideas, and I went and did a few sort of one-day sessions with business coaches and things like that and I was really I was almost desperate trying to gather information together. And it was the first introduction that I really heard about content marketing and online education, and seeing people kind of make these businesses, being able to work from home and being able to work with people remotely. And you can imagine architecture is a very in-person kind of on-site experience. So this was quite alien to me. Of course, I was a blog reader. I was somebody that, read information online. But it was a very kind of new sort of idea. And I thought that if I just started writing, committing to writing on a regular basis, it was going to be a really good way to share my thoughts, share what I knew, be able to help people, and start putting that information out there. And so, I sort of patched together a website. I did my degree in the early 1990s, and I remember we did a semester of learning how to HTML code a website from scratch when I was in my early 20s. So I, then tried to figure out how to use WordPress and things like that, and built this website, started blogging, and the first blog post and newsletter went out on, I think it was the 18th of September 2014 to a handful of people, and we just started building it from there.
Yeah, look, that's amazing. It's not fun to make a lot of content and people say be consistent and just keep putting stuff out there if you're not getting eyeballs on it and getting positive feedback and getting questions and building an audience. So for you, how quickly did that audience come around? You're putting this stuff out there. Did they find you pretty quickly?
I think that at the beginning of 2015, I did Marie Forleo's B School, which at the time was sort of the thing to do when you were in an online sort of, content marketing or education sort of space. And from there, I learned a lot about guest blogging and trying to get visible on other people's platforms and accessing other people's audiences to help grow mine. And so I started doing a lot of guest blogging, and that was when the audience started finding me more regularly on Undercover Architect and learning about SEO and those kinds of things as well. So yeah, it did start to grow quite steadily, and we created sort of lead magnets and those kinds of things. I say we, it was me sitting alone, but created lead magnets and started sort of navigating all of those nuts and bolts of trying to attract an audience to you. And I had a lot of really lovely friends, of course, who were spreading the word and sharing Undercover Architect with people that they knew who were building and renovating as well.
Amazing. Yeah. So look, we got started around the same time. I started my piano course business about 11 years ago. So I remember all the B School pushes. I know Marie Forleo is still around. I don't know if it's still B School or what. But you mentioned specifically that guest blogging is something you learned in that program, and that's what really helped grow your audience initially. Is that a strategy that you're still using today or recommending today?
I think that if you were starting out, it's definitely a great idea. Now we have enough, well, not enough, but we have a lot of momentum, obviously, with the content that we create. And I found now, obviously, doing our content dissemination process at the moment is the podcast and has been for a few years. So, and that's a content platform I really love. So I don't do as much blogging directly on the website anymore. And so I think that when you're sort of cutting your teeth, it's a really great way to both be able to formulate your thoughts in the written word, and then also to be able to understand what audiences are looking for and see what resonates with them, because it's very difficult to do that when you've only got, a handful of people kind of coming to your website. But to be able to do it on other people's websites and then be able to get that feedback loop happening, I found that it was just a really good learning curve for me to be able to understand how to write for an audience, what information was helpful, how they liked it structured, how long they liked it, and it was just really great to be able to test that on people that already had platforms of the types of people I was trying to reach and help.
How did you identify what, I guess, for lack of a better word, influencers to target and reach out to, knowing there would be enough audience overlap?
For me, it was just obviously doing a lot of research and even things just like sort of plugging in what I thought were phrases that people would look for on Google when they were building or renovating. Of course, as an architect, I had been working with my audience for, as an architect for a very long time. So I'd sort of had conversations with people about the kinds of information that they were looking for early on in their projects. And so starting to sort of plug that into Google and see what came up. And then also because I was sort of in that space already, there were websites and resources that I knew that clients of mine had used and looked at and tapped into. And I think, it was just obviously being conscientious with research and familiarizing myself with that online world in my space.
So to be clear, Undercover Architect, you help homeowners optimize the process of new builds and renovations. Is that roughly fair?
Yes, yeah. Get basically know what they need to know so that they can navigate their project confidently and create a fantastic outcome in their home.
Okay, so stick with me on this question. I teach piano. That's my online course, right? You know what a piano is, right, Amelia?
Yes, I know how to play piano.
You know what it sounds like when somebody knows how to play piano, you know what that sounds like, right?
Yeah.
I did a big renovation on my house a couple years ago. My brand is called the Online Course Guy. It never even occurred to me to look for online courses in this area. Now, halfway through, at the end, I didn't know what I didn't know. I wish somebody would have taught me this process ahead of time, right? What I'm getting at is with my niche, people know it's a thing. They're actively searching for it. And maybe I'm the dummy. I don't know. But how do you navigate when people need this information, but they don't necessarily know they need this information?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Jacques. And it is it's the big question for us to solve in Undercover Architect. And because oftentimes you actually don't even realize that you don't know what you don't know until you're well in the trenches of your project and there's so much, flying past you. And so for me, it was, I think that's been the biggest thing, is just basically getting the information in front of people in a way, because you're still probably searching for things online. We find that one of the most visited posts on the blog is about external colours and advice around external colours. There was another one about butlers' pantries. These kinds of things which people are looking for have then introduced them to the Undercover Architect world, and then they've started to see what Undercover Architect is about. And to be frank with you, if I had my time again, I potentially would not have named the business Undercover Architect, because people see that business name. And I don't practice traditional architecture anymore. I don't do one-to-one design services anymore. And so people see architect and they just assume that that's what the business does, rather than it being an online education business. And so it's been really interesting because obviously the architect does give it credibility, and it demonstrates the level of experience and the angle at which I come at this information from. We've got so many, obviously, reality and, sort of people who've just done their own project and then started teaching how to do a project in the online space. And so it's been really interesting in that way. But I found that, and we can talk about it more if you want to, but I started the podcast at the end of 2016. And that really gave me a great opportunity to share content in an entirely different way to the blog posts that enabled me then to create a relationship with people so that they start to actually see not only are they gaining knowledge through the podcast in a really structured way because of the way that we started the podcast, but then they're starting to see that there is so much that they don't know. And then that there's this resource that they can come to learn more, or to, at the very, get access what we have available for free, or then invest in one of the online courses and programs.
So I've got an extra year on you since I started the business, but you have an extra year on me with starting a podcast. I started this podcast in 2017, and you're speaking very highly of podcasting in general and what that's been able to do for you. I think you may have said this earlier. Is that kind of your top traffic platform today? Is through the podcast? That's how people are finding you?
Yeah, most definitely. We have, as I said, we've been doing that since late 2016, over 330 episodes, around 3 million downloads. It ranks really highly generally sits in the top 5 of its category in Australia, and it ranks well in other countries as well. It's listened to in over 190 countries around the world, which is really fantastic. And yeah, at the moment, it's the highest ranked and rated Australian design podcast. So it's definitely been a fantastic source of traffic for Undercover Architect. I think podcasts too are quite unique compared to a blog post, for example, because people are obviously hearing your voice in their ear for, at least half an hour every week. And so it creates a fantastic opportunity to build a relationship with your audience, and for audience to figure out whether or not they actually resonate with you, whether they can listen to you for that long, whether they are aligned with your view on the world and your view on whatever you're teaching. And for us, because I'd been blogging for a couple of years before I started the podcast, I found that a lot of the blogging I'd been doing had been really quite reactive. Somebody would ask a question, I'd realize it was the third time I'd got that question, I'd write a blog post on it. Whereas the podcast gave me an opportunity to go back and think about, okay, what journey do I want to take a homeowner on? Now that I've learned a lot more about them, I've learned so much more about homeowners working with them in this way than I ever knew about them as an architect working with them one-to-one. And they tell me different things to what they told me as an architect. So I think then it gave me the opportunity to structure a content journey that was quite different to what we'd been doing in the blog. And so we start, the podcast starts with, the first 4 questions that you need to answer in any project. It then dives into designing for orientation, because that's one of the most, I believe it's the single most important thing you can do when you're designing a home. And then we go through how to design a home room by room, and understanding what's going to make or break your home design in that sense, and navigating your budget, knowing your team, and literally breaking this podcast into seasons as we traveled through. And it gave me, a blog post can be 500 to 1,000 words. And these podcasts, breaking them into seasons and deep diving into these topics across the course of a season just gives me an opportunity to really get into the nuts and bolts of a topic and be super helpful with the information that we share.
I'm so mad at you. I needed you like 2 or 3 years ago. I needed you. Where were you?
If you honestly, I'm surprised you didn't find me with Google, the amount of work we do on our SEO. So you obviously.
But that's the problem. Like, I wasn't actively searching for resources because I didn't know what I didn't know. You know what I mean? When people, how people find my podcast. So for this brand, the Online Course Guy, the Online Course Show, by far and away the number one traffic platform for me is also a podcast, right? And so the way people find the podcast is one of 2 ways. They'll go to their podcast app. They're already podcast listeners, and they're like, I wonder if there's shows about online courses. I'm interested in online courses. They type in online courses. They find the Online Course Show, and it's been around for 7 years. It's got some credibility behind it. Second way they discover the podcast is when they hear me featured on another podcast. How are people discovering your podcast primarily?
I find that it's via search, so similar things, so via searching on the platforms or searching on the website itself. And then I have a lot of people tell me that they've found out from a friend or a family member about the podcast. I have done interviews here and there and also been at particular sort of reno and design shows and things like that, and people have heard about the podcast in those instances as well. In terms of being a guest on other people's podcasts, I haven't been great at doing that, and it is an area that we're targeting in the business. So it's fair, and it probably actually kicked off with you reaching out to me about this interview. It was like, actually, we need to be doing more of this. And so it's something that I've been a guest on a few podcasts along the way, but it's not something that we've actively done. And I think it's, if you do have a podcast and you want your podcast to grow, it makes sense to be able to be interviewed on other people's podcasts because you're already tapping into people who listen to podcasts. In Australia, when I started the podcast, the Australian podcast listening audience wasn't actually that massive. I'd have chats to people who didn't even know what a podcast was. So it's definitely escalated in terms of its people's appetite for content that way. And I think there's lots of avenues to be able to be found by being on other people's podcasts too.
Yeah, this podcast, the audience for this podcast is not your primary demographic. However, I'm sure there are people out there listening to this that are where I was. You don't know what you don't know. Please don't make my mistake and listen to Amelia's content now. So while we're on that note, like what is the name of your podcast?
It's called Get It Right with Undercover Architect.
Right. Of course it is.
Yeah.
Get it right. You got to get it right.
And it got named that because that's what people were saying to me that they wanted to do. So when I started out as an architect, it was also a case of learning how people wanted, the kinds of ways that they talked about it. There's a whole kind of language in architecture that homeowners don't actually use. So I kept talking about well-designed homes and, sort of this type of thing. And then I was working one-to-one with clients remotely in the early days of Undercover Architect, and I would have a questionnaire where I would ask them, what are their greatest fears if this project doesn't go ahead? What are they most looking forward to? What do they actually want to do? What are, this kind of stuff. And this phrase of get it right, I just want to get it right, I don't want to stuff it up, kept coming back over and over and over again. And so that's where the podcast name came from.
Cool. All right. So we have talked a lot about the history and some of the marketing channels and whatnot. We haven't spent much time about any of your actual programs yet. So today in 2024, about to hit the 10-year anniversary, what do your offers look like?
So we have the signature program Home Method, which is a comprehensive program that takes you step by step through the process of designing, building or renovating your home, whoever you're working with and wherever you're located. And you join that, pay one fee, and there's no expiry. That comes with an online community, a Facebook group, and regular Zoom Q&As to be able to get personalized help on your project. And so that's really the headliner for the business and the program that is recommended for people to support them through their project. And then we have a raft of DIY or self-paced online courses that people can join for particular challenges, or if they're wanting to get a taste of what it's like to have some online education for this process. Because as you said, a lot of people don't sort of think to access online education or an online course for their project. So we've got some mini courses that deal with some particular challenges that I know homeowners have so that they can get some meaningful help for those challenges, but also see what it's like to be educated online about their project. And then a couple of chunkier online courses. One's called Home Design Masterclass. The other one's Interior Design 101. Home Design Masterclass unpacks how I, as an architect, go about designing the floor plan of a new build or renovation project. Interior Design 101 deals with all of the interior design selections of your fixtures and finishes, being able to focus on functionality and durability, as well as obviously aesthetics as you navigate your project. So it's a suite of programs, but the signature program is Home Method.
Yeah, Home Method, that's the flagship product. That's the one I needed, right? That's the one I needed. Get somebody going with renovation. So I do see this on your website now. I can click on Home Method and then I see the other DIY courses. There's several of them, like you mentioned. Do you find that there's any confusion on your audience's side with so many different options?
It's an interesting question. I think there can be. People can wonder if they just do Home Method, do they need to do any of the other courses? We find that when we do have launches of Home Method, the people that have bought a program from us previously compared to those who haven't is about 50-50. So I've always been told by coaches that when you get people to spend a little bit of money, they'll then spend more. It's not necessarily been the case for us in Undercover Architect. And we've sort of tested that over and over as we've sort of been creating online courses. I started working with a mentor in late 2020, and it was the end of that sort of first year of COVID. And I remember at the time I was sort of it'd been a really, really big year supporting people and being obviously at home and online, and also navigating kids being at home and all of that kind of stuff. And at the time, we actually had two sort of signature programs. One dealt with sort of the overall steps, and the other one largely just focused on the construction process and the stages of construction. One was called How to Get It Right. The other one was called Manage Your Build. And he looked at the structure of the courses. Both of those had Facebook communities. And he said to me, how do you deal with having so many avatars? And I said to him, what do you mean? And he said, well, you've got so many people, that are going to be coming to you for different things. And, how do you navigate it? And it was like a light bulb went off for me. I hadn't sort of ever had that perspective on it. And we found people were always getting the best results when they did both How to Get It Right and Manage Your Build together. But of course, it was very complex because we had two Facebook communities. We didn't, if somebody asked a question, I had to check if they were a member of both programs versus just one in terms of being able to answer their question. And so he recommended amalgamating the two programs, which we went ahead and we did immediately, just pulled them together. We went through a process of analysing all the members, looked at how we could grandfather them into each course, all of this kind of stuff. And then a year later, I rebuilt the entire program as what is now Home Method. And it was a really great opportunity to, with all of the learning. I mean, I've been teaching these steps online in some way, shape or form since the end of 2014. So this rebuild that happened, sort of benefited from 7 or 8 years of learning how people learn online, which is a whole kind of other thing to really grasp when you're an online educator, and really packaging up the information that in a way that was going to be helpful for them to learn. And I mean, it's tricky because Home Method deals with a process that can go for 2 or 3 years in time frame. We have people who jump into that program when they still might be a year or two out from even starting their project. So you've got this very kind of comprehensive program that's dealing with a very chunky, long process. And so packaging up how it teaches people is almost as important as what it teaches people. So that's definitely that was a long answer to your question, but that's, and I know I went on a few tangents there, but yeah, that's, for me, I think that once people understand, we also do, when we do a podcast episodes that talk a lot about what's inside Home Method. We've got interviews, the latest podcasts are all interviews with Home Method members. And so I think having those conversations on the podcast and in our email newsletters helps people self-identify whether, how Home Method's going to help them. So then that also creates clarity around the course selections as well.
Yeah, that's a great story about the mentor you had a few years ago, suggesting that or asking you the question, like, how do you do this? How do you reconcile these different avatars? And I guess it's something you hadn't quite thought of like that before, and it's been a beneficial exercise. One thing that you mentioned that I'd love to grab a hold of is you talked about your launches for the Home Method. Yet I can go on your site, it looks like right now, and sign up for just under $3,000. Tell me about these launches.
Yeah, so Home Method is available to join every day of the year. We've found that launches help bring new people into our audience and introduce them to Undercover Architect, and it helps create, I think, attention and urgency around Home Method as well. When you join during a launch, you can get accesses to obviously bonuses, but you also get a sense of what Undercover Architect's really about. So we have a particular launch sequence that we run. We do about 3 to 4 launches per year, and we've done that since we sort of brought Home Method together. I wasn't launching with that regularity or consistency before. And again, another thing that the mentor that I work with had said to me, he said to me, describe your first launch experience to me, and out on a scale of 1 to 10, how stressful was it? And I remembered it was back in 2015. And I said to him, it was a 15 out of 10. It was one of the most horrible experiences I've ever had. And I said, but the challenging thing is that I think in today's day and age, and because I'm not selling to business owners who are actively looking for this kind of information, it's like you said, people don't go necessarily looking for an online course to help them with this. And they're also, people are, I feel, sandwiching their renovations or new builds around very demanding, busy lives. And so the launches give us an opportunity to really get their attention and help them understand very quickly what we do and how we help. And so when he said to me, okay, how stressful is it? And I said 15 out of 10. And he said, well, what would happen if you could get it down to a 3 out of 10? And I said, I'd launch all the time. And he said, well, then that's what you need to start working towards. So that's what we've done, is really systemize the launches so that they're much more smoother to run. I can then show up in the way that I need to and have the energy that is important in terms of being able to help people. And I think that's enabled then us to do this more regular launch cycle. And it does do a really great job. We run webinars, we advertise to cold audiences, we bring in a lot of new people into the audience. And whether they join that launch or they join in a future launch or they decide to join an evergreen program or they don't join at all, they've been introduced to the Undercover Architect community in a really centered way that just helps us be able to get them to understand exactly what we do and how we help, so that they can figure out if we're for them or if it's not what they want, and they can unsubscribe. So it's worked really well for us.
One thing you mentioned toward the beginning of that answer was that the launches provide you visibility to people who maybe haven't discovered you yet. And I wanted to ask you how that's possible. Normally when we launch, it's to our email list and maybe to our podcast audience and to our own audience. We're launching something to our own audience. I think you might have hit on it toward the end. It sounds like maybe you're running paid ads to the launches. Yeah,
we do. We run paid ads every, all the time. And in launches, we increase our paid ad spend, and then and we have a particular launch event. So it's either a webinar or a challenge we've been experimenting with lately. And so we will then be advertising largely to a cold audience, but also advertising to people who are already in our audience that aren't members of Home Method, and then have that launch event as the webinar or the challenge. And then off the back of that, be promoting Home Method. So again, doing retargeting ads once that webinar is complete. And that also works in association with organic social media and with email campaigns too.
And the paid ads are on multiple platforms, just Facebook ads. Where are they?
We do, during launches, we do Meta. So we've dabbled in a few other sort of platforms, but found that that's been the most meaningful. And throughout the year, it's Meta and Google.
All right. Hey, out there, it is Jacques. Just a quick break from the conversation. If you are already making some progress with your course business, but are looking to take it to the next level, I've got something special for you, my Next Level Coaching Program. This program is designed for course creators who are already seeing steady income, but are ready to scale their revenue and optimize their business for even more growth and efficiency. In Next Level Coaching, you'll get personalized feedback, live Q&A sessions with me, and access to all of our cutting edge strategies. To learn more and apply, head over to oc.show/nextlevel. I'd love to help you take your business to the next level. All right, let's get back to our chat with Amelia. When it's not during a launch, what are you advertising?
So when we're not doing a launch, we are advertising a couple of lead magnets that I have. So we're trying to do lead gen all of the time. Or lead generation, and always trying to get people onto the Undercover Architect email list. We have nurture sequences on the backs of our lead magnets. And so those then help introduce people to what Undercover Architect does, how it helps. It offers them some of our mini courses at discounted prices. And then we, of course, talk to them about Home Method. And then we also have campaigns that retarget Home Method in between launches. So if people have shown an interest in Home Method, they can see ads being, they can be retargeted with ads about Home Method. We also do what we call omnipresence. And again, this was something that came from my mentor. So your organic social gets seen by so little of your audience, that we just put a very small amount of money behind content pieces that we know resonate and get good engagement. And we will spread basically pay to get those seen. So anybody who's interacted with the Undercover Architect world in some way, shape or form, be it on socials or via the website, will see those Omni ads. And it's kind of likened to, when you're looking at a particular car to buy, all of a sudden that's the only car that you see on the road. So, it's that thing of building up that social proof that when you've interacted with Undercover Architect in some way, you're then getting fed content that's helpful for you, but also helps you decide whether Undercover Architect's a good fit or not.
It's all very interesting, Amelia. Let's talk a little bit about pricing. I'm going to throw 2 questions at you related to that. Is the pricing the same during the launch or different? And then just how did you come up with the pricing?
The pricing is the same during the launch. And then in terms of how we came up with the pricing, that product has been different prices over the years. We increased it to that price. I'm trying to think when it was. It was sort of maybe about a year ago, or maybe earlier this year. I can't recall. But for me, the pricing at $2,950, it's a program that as I said, that program's been through lots of different iterations. I had a program called Your Reno Roadmap, which was a similar. It had a similar kind of structure in terms of an online course and online community, and we were charging $5,500 for it when it was that. And as we went through these iterations of then closing that down, having how to get it right, having manage your build, they were lower price points, and it was really experimenting with what kind of audience was buying those programs, and were they people that I enjoyed working with, because of course I've got this online community and regular Zoom Q&As, and so really kind of seeing what the character of the audience was that was being attracted by these different price points as well, and what their needs were and how they were sort of needing to access information. The $2,950 for me is, I know that it can feel like a big investment for people. Generally, it's less than 1% of what most people are spending on their projects. So it's actually a small drop in the ocean. And we know that it can save people tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of dollars in their project. But I also, the way that we sell is through launches. And so I think that if we were going to start charging more for it, I'd probably need to do sales calls. And that's not something that I want to set the business up to do. So that for me is sort of the price point of where that product sits, and looking around at other programs in the marketplace, not just in my industry, but obviously in other industries as well, and where the price point I think starts to tip into different sale pathways that you may or may not have the appetite to do in your business.
I'm glad you brought that last part up, because a lot of people will tell you that once you cross maybe that $2,000 threshold, that's when you can't really sell it online. You've got to do sales calls. And you said you're able to sell at that price point more like $3,000 because of launches. How are you, but explain that more. How are you able to get people to pay you $3,000 without a phone call?
Well, we work very hard to show what we do, and I work very hard to show that I know what I do, that I've got a lot of experience in this, that I know how to help you, that I know that I've worked with loads of, I deal with tens of thousands of homeowners every year. So it's this thing of really, I think because we share a lot of content, we do a weekly podcast. I send out 2 email newsletters per week. We do regular socials. People get the opportunity to see whether this is something that's trustworthy. I think that, it's really fascinating. The last launch that we did, which was in August, only a little while ago, at the time of recording yours and my conversation, for the very first time, I had people questioning whether the ads were AI. And that was the first experience I'd had of that. I found the launches are as well as being a really great opportunity to get people into our ecosystem, they're also a really great opportunity to test en masse kind of what are people experiencing at the moment? What are their biggest challenges? Because you're getting, to deal with thousands and thousands of people during a launch. And so it enables me to sort of get a barometer of what are people's main concerns. And there's always consistency, but there's these sort of little tweaks that I think are about what the online world is experiencing. And that AI question was super fascinating. So I think this is the thing, is that we regularly demonstrate through conversations with existing members, conversation with members who completed their projects. We have so many testimonials for the effectiveness of Home Method and learning information in this way. And so building up that trust and building up that demonstrated impact for me has been critical to being able to help people understand that this is a valuable investment for them and that they will, it will do what it promises to do. So, and I, as an architect, I feel like I have another layer of responsibility over and above what a lot of online educators in my space have, because all of my education was about risk management and liability and, only being in integrity about how you help a homeowner. And so being in the online world, to me, I operate on the same standards as I did and still do as an architect. And so the professionalism with which we operate is really important to me. And so I think that all of that comes through in the way that we share content, the way we share the information that we teach, and is then demonstrated inside Home Method. So you've got to build up that, you've got to build up that trust curve. There are so many people out there. There's courses teaching you how to build a course with AI. So people need to understand that you're actually the real deal, that you know what you're talking about, and that you've got demonstrated experience and social proof that you've been able to do it with other people as well. So
that's amazing. I think that'll be inspiring to a lot of people that you're able to do that. Like I said, without a phone call, without an application. So on that, are you offering a payment plan on the 3K?
We've experimented with it, and it's always been, we've never sold very many of them. So for example, when we have tested with it, maybe 2% of the sales results will be via payment plan. And then inevitably they become an administrative challenge because somebody will default on a payment. So, we've just made the call that we don't do it as a general offering. I think if I was to increase the price and test whether the price would work at a higher level still without sales calls, you'd probably start to see the need for a payment plan. But most people who are thinking about building or renovating their home are going to be spending upwards of $500,000 on it. We find that we have everybody from anywhere from $100,000 to over $4 million with project budgets joining the program. So massive range of project types, project spends. Most people are sort of between that $600,000 to $1.2 million on their project spend. And so I think if you're thinking about that kind of volume of money for your project, then being able to access the $2,950 to learn how to do it well is, for me, part of that ideal customer avatar kind of profile. So, yeah.
If it was only 2% of people taking you up on it, I don't blame you for removing it. I just can't believe on such a high price point that it's that low. I would have thought that people would, it's a way to offer to make it more affordable.
But when you're thinking about the amount of money you're going to spend on your project, it's such a small percentage of that. Your architectural fee, even when you start looking at all the professional fees that you've got, $2,950 is, I think people, when they start to realize what's in it and how it helps them, because they hear the stories that we share, they read the information about it, they realize that it's a very small amount to pay to save you money and avoid mistakes in all of those other areas. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we have with helping people understand its value, and why we share so much information about how it works, why we talk to members on the podcast, why we have so many testimonials, all of those, and why I've invested in, a company to help us get testimonials in the past and all of that kind of stuff, is because I think that a lot of people, when they're thinking about their projects, it's the money that comes from the bank. And so it just looks like zeros on a page, whether the $2,950 for Home Method comes out of their own pocket. So there's that. And then I think to people, the whole point of Home Method is that you won't make the expensive mistakes that most people make. 50% of projects go over budget. So I have these conversations with Home Method members about, where did you see Home Method save you money? And they can cite a few examples, but the whole point is that you don't make the mistake in the first place. So I've had mentors say to me, you really need to tell people as part of your selling process, is this going to save them $100,000 or $150,000? Or, you got to name numbers in the process of marketing this course to them. And I'm like, well, the whole idea is that they're not wasting that money. They're buying this so that they can avoid that. So many members have said to me, Amelia, I can't tell you, because the whole point is that we didn't make the mistake and we haven't had the drama that most people have. And and when I'm in it, I realize that, and a friend's telling me about this horrible experience that they're having. I realize how much simpler our project has been because I've educated myself this way. And so trying to have that conversation with homeowners is really important as part of them helping them understand whether home method's going to be a fit for them.
This is probably going to be the last question on pricing. Are you charging in US dollars or Australian dollars?
We charge in Australian dollars. Yeah. So it's around 1,000. It's just under $2,000 US. Yep.
Is the majority of your audience, or is all of your audience in Australia?
The majority of our audience is. We do have members from the US, UK, Canada, New Zealand, parts of Europe as well. And that's largely because they've listened to the podcast and then figured out that, hey, this is actually helpful and I don't have access to this here. And I remember I got to, travel to the States early last year and got to meet up with one of my Home Method members in San Francisco. And I said to him, how did you find Undercover Architect? And also, how did you trust that an Australian woman telling you about your project was going to be relevant for you? And he said, well, what you were doing for me was explaining all of the steps. You were giving me a framework. And we have an online course called the Welcome Home course that I actually created with an American architect in 2018. And so any of our American or our Canadian members get access to that as well. And the big thing about that is that it translates some of the terminology. There's few terminology differences between Australia and the US in particular. And it also puts the dimensions. I have recommended dimensions inside Home Method for designing the home and, or auditing the design that you've had done by somebody else. It puts all of those from metric into imperial. And so, there's a few nuanced differences in that. But he said for him, it gave him the framework, and then that enabled him to be much more empowered having the conversation with his architect. And his architect was then the one that handled all the geographically specific stuff. So I think that's the thing is, we want to be working more with overseas homeowners because it does work to be able to approach it that way. But it is jumping that hurdle of people thinking, I need somebody who's very close to me to be able to help me navigate this because it feels like a really on-site, in-person thing that is geographically unique. In the years that I've been doing this, what I've seen is, yes, there can be some differences and climate can drive differences between your projects. The biggest difference between projects is actually you as the homeowner, your uniqueness, what your priorities are, the baggage that you bring to your project about your mindset, your values, what home means to you, the nostalgia that you have about home. They're the main things that drive the differences between projects, not the project itself. And so that for me has been really interesting as experimenting with how we can go into an overseas market more in a bigger way.
You're sharing a wealth of knowledge. I simply asked what currency you were charging, and you went off in that amazing tangent. I was like,
you can always cut me
no,
off.
No, don't apologize. I was like, I just got to sneak in this last pricing question. It's going to be a quick answer, and then we'll move on to the next thing and drop in more knowledge for us. So I appreciate it. Look, I told you this off the recording, but I have a client in my coaching program who actually turned me on to you, who is in a similar niche. She's a local renovation coach in Canada. And is getting started trying to go online. And she wanted to specifically ask you for your advice for her to get more eyes on her and her course.
Yeah, so you've just got to be visible and consistent. Like consistency for me has been the biggest thing that there's been. When I started blogging in September 2014, I made a commitment I was going to write a weekly blog, and I did until we started the podcast, and then the podcast has been the regular thing. So and setting up systems that help you be consistent because you're not always going to feel like doing it. You're not always going to feel like being visible. And it's a really boring piece of advice, but it just is what it takes. There's no magic bullet. There's no, I think people are looking for sort of the quick fix and how they can escalate their audiences really quickly. For me, it's just required continuing to show up, continuing to listen to my audience, really finding ways to harvest the language that they use, the way that they talk, so that what you have to share can resonate with them. And creating that audience feedback loop is super important as well. So, so that you can inform a lot of what you're doing by what actually is going to be meaningful for those that need to hear it.
That's the second time that I remember you saying systems, right? And how important systems are. You mentioned it with the question about how to get more eyes on Sean's stuff. Is consistency and systems can help that. You mentioned also when you were talking about the launches going from a 15 out of 10 to a 3 out of 10, how systemizing the launches were so important. One of my favorite quotes, I have it written on my board over here, is from Atomic Habits by James Clear. You do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And you're smiling. You're familiar with that quote.
Yeah. Yes, very much so.
Obviously, systems are very important to you and your business.
Very much so. I mentioned that I started working with the mentor at the end of 2020. I got to the we haven't touched on the fact that I have a second business, Live Life Build, which I co-own with a builder that helps builders run their businesses better. So we've got an online membership in that and a couple of self-paced programs. So COVID began in 2020, and that was sort of the first year that we started running our mastermind program in Live Life Build. And I found that COVID was a year of people were really wanting to get their projects done, but they weren't necessarily wanting to invest in learning on them. So we were getting a lot of traffic, a lot of questions. I was needing to support our existing members through a really challenging time construction-wise, because of course, that completely changed the way that people were having to build homes. And with Live Life Build, our builders were having to navigate all of that as business owners and how they were going to run their sites through a COVID, sort of condition in our world. And so that was a really intensive time kind of supporting both communities. And I got to 2020 and I had one virtual assistant at the time. That was my only team member, and then a couple of subcontractors helping with a couple of things. And I remember I got to about September or October, and I literally just wanted to shut everything down. And I realized that I needed a mentor to be able to help me kind of navigate into the next phase of the business. And so I looked around for somebody who wasn't just coaching people how to make money in their businesses, but was working with a lot of different niches. And I found my current mentor, who's a guy named Scott Oldford. And then I also looked for an online business manager, because at the time, all of what we did was basically in mine or my VA's head. And I couldn't get him to, as try as I might, I couldn't get him to sort of document SOPs for what he was doing. We had sort of, stuff sort of documented in an ad hoc way, but we were sort of doing everything so quickly and on the fly. And it just meant that everything was not going as well as it should. So I hired an online business manager who came into the business about 20 hours a week. And her role was largely to get us to systemize things. So she worked really well with my VA. She set up a structure for that. And my VA, it got to the point where I said to him, look, I've got big growth plans for the business. Are you on board? And he said, actually, no, I'm not. So we looked for a new VA it was a really big shift in the way we were operating, my mindset about the business and the level at which we could operate. So we found, another fantastic team member, and we started really, she came on board being able to actively systemize what we were doing. I now have 2 full-time Filipino virtual assistants. I've got a part-time community coordinator, and I've got a couple of other part-time team members as well who are they're in Australia. And so they all sort of started coming on board about May or June of last year. And now that we've got a bigger team, those systems are really integral, and they've been incredibly important for being able to train the team members when they started as well. And now it's part of the process that whenever we're doing something, an SOP gets created for it, or the SOP that we've got gets updated. So it's just part and parcel now of how we operate, and Live Life Build operates similarly. So systems are really, really boring. I know that I would rather poke myself in the eye with a fork than create an SOP. There's lots of shortcuts to be able to do them now. You can literally do a screen recording and then drop it into ChatGPT and get it to create one and then just tweak it. But it's so integral. Business should be boring. So you don't want I think a lot of entrepreneurs look for the dopamine hits in their business. You really want your business to be boring. Look for the dopamine hits elsewhere. Because it's what creates predictability and consistency in your business as well, and manages your nervous system at the same time.
Wow, that's amazing. I have several books on my bookshelf behind me, and one of my favorites is called From 6 to 7 Figures. It's by Austin Netzley, and the premise behind the book is that it takes a lot of grit to and just working hard to get to 6 figures, but those are not the same things that take you from 6 to 7 figures. It's all about mainly systems, essentially.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to hear, 3 years ago, you made this decision that you really wanted to grow. You needed systems, right? You were probably kind of at that 6-figure mark, and now you're well on your way to that 7-figure mark, largely because of systems, right?
Yeah, systems and getting the product right. So I mentioned to you that we amalgamated the program, those 2 programs into Home Method. And in that next year, that and through building the systems, we doubled our revenue in 12 months. And then we've just been steadily increasing it. So it really, I think, getting your systems in place so that you can just keep showing up, that you can keep being visible, that you can keep doing what you're supposed to do. I can be really guilty of getting into the weeds of the business and jumping into the detail of it all. And when you're starting out, of course, that's what you need to do. You need to wear all of the hats. And for me, I remember when I started, I didn't want to outsource anything until I kind of understood how it worked. It's myself. So I didn't outsource Facebook ads until I knew how to run my own. I didn't outsource the website until I knew, 90% of how to build a website like that. And I've seen, others that have grown potentially faster than me because they did outsource from the beginning. But like, I'm the main breadwinner of our family. This business had to work, and I couldn't keep funneling money that I was making in the business back into the business. I was really bootstrapping so much of this from the start. And what I was making was going obviously to supporting our family. So it's been this interesting sort of ride of, how much do you take on, but then how much can you let that go as you start to grow as a business owner, and then work where you really do have the biggest impact and you can move the needle the most for your business.
So we've mostly talked about Undercover Architect, which is targeting the homeowners. And you mentioned a second brand there briefly that's targeting builders. So it sounds like that's more B2B, right? So I'd love to hear your experience having both, right? B2C and B2B. What is the difference in marketing and sales between the two?
It's very different because I think that when you're doing a B2B marketing, you're able to demonstrate that people will immediately get a financial return on what you're teaching them. So, we help builders run their businesses better. We've got demonstrated evidence that we can have them turning their profitability, their business around very, very quickly. And that quick win that online course creators and educators often teach you to try and achieve whenever, or even coaches, they say, one of the biggest things when a client comes to work with you is you've got to get them a quick win. And if the quick win is the financial return that compensates for what they spent on your program, then that's a completely, fantastic thing to do. And I think that can be much more straightforward to achieve in a B2B program. For Undercover Architect, the people that I work with are generally doing their long-term family home. And it's not about financial return. It's about knowing that they're going to get it right, that the home that they're going to create is actually going to serve them, that they're not going to have long-term regrets, and that the big amount of money that they're investing that's costing them a lot in their lifestyle is actually going to matter. It's going to create the kind of lifestyle that they want to lead, and they're not going to waste any money. So they're very different propositions in terms of talking to an audience and selling to an audience. And I've found too that business owners seem to be much happier to shout from the rooftops about how you've helped them than individual customers are. So in Undercover Architect, there are loads of people who are using my program or are using Undercover Architect resources that never tell their team, never tell anybody that they're doing it, because they don't want to be seen to be treading on professionals' toes, or like they're checking up on their professionals or putting their professionals offside. And so that can be really challenging, because obviously you want them telling everybody that they're using this program to get a better outcome. They get a feedback loop that, oh, you're very different to any other client that we've worked with. You seem so much more educated. It's so amazing to work with you because you're so much more collaborative, And there will be, of course, a lot that will say, oh, look, I've got, this program, Undercover Architect. And we have now lots of architects and builders and things like that recommending our program to their clients. But I find that business owners, for us to get testimonials, for them to, one of our processes inside Live Life Build when we do a launch is we actually get our existing members into our Zoom calls with the audience that we're speaking to about our program, and they will talk to these members these people in real time about the difference that it's made. And they'll talk about their numbers, and they'll talk about the way that it's changed their life and that kind of stuff. So it's been really fascinating watching the differences of those two different types of audiences.
Wow, that last thing is absolutely brilliant. Having a Zoom call like with people thinking about signing up, that and then your current clients, or I guess former clients as well, who have had an amazing experience, are there. Because it's one thing to chat or just hear from the creator of the program who's impossibly biased, but if they get to actively speak to people that have been through it, that's an incredible strategy.
Yeah, and I think too, I mean, it's a strategy that we've used in Undercover Architect as well. We've been having Home Method members onto the podcast, both who've finished their project and also who are in the midst of their project. So I went to an architectural conference last year, and Kevin McLeod from Grand Designs was, who I know isn't super familiar in the States, but he's massive here in Australia as a UK TV presenter, and he was presenting at this conference, and I remember messaging my team and say, hey, how about we do a Grand Designs, which follows the process of a project, but on Grand Designs there's always drama and, it's horrific. I said, how about we do an audio Grand Designs without the drama? And so we've been having these great conversations on the podcast where we're now starting to follow people's projects who are Home Method members. So I think, that can be, to the question before about how can I get more people to see my stuff, I think if your members are willing to share their stories, for us we had to get to a point where we could find members who are willing to talk about it. Members can be really, in Home Method, can be really private about their projects because it's your home. So you don't want to talk about how much money you're spending on it. You don't necessarily want to talk about how big a home you're creating, all of those kinds of things. Whereas, to get those members, our builder members, into Live Life Build calls and sharing how it's worked and how it's helped them has been incredibly effective for people who are thinking of joining the program to see others like them having success with what we teach.
Amelia, just a couple more questions for you here. I would love to ask you about some of your tech stack before we go. Would you mind sharing what you're using to host your course, execute other areas of your fulfillment and your business, and any tech and tools you're loving?
Isn't it interesting? That's the thing I really underestimated as an online course and an online educator is all of the monthly subscriptions that you have to pay to have all of these working parts in your business. So both of our online programs in both businesses are built on WordPress sites with an Access Ally and Progress Ally plugin on them. That's been like that for Undercover Architect probably for about 7 years, I think. So it's a system that we're both, that we're very familiar with and that I know how to operate as well. We use ActiveCampaign for our email system. ActiveCampaign just keeps putting its prices up though, which is quite frustrating.
They do. Yes. They just went up. But
yeah.
I've been with them for years and years and I love it. But yeah, they just went up again. You're right.
Yeah. And it's this great inertia that when you've got tens of thousands of people on an email list and you've got automations and everything like that, I think they know that it's really difficult to get, for us to switch systems to something else would be a massive undertaking as a project for us as a business. So that's very frustrating that you kind of to a certain level, there'll be a ceiling, I think, where we'll get to and I'll go, no, I'm done. I'm not going to tolerate this anymore. But at the moment it's really good because ActiveCampaign talks to Access Ally really easily. And, so the automation of when somebody purchases our program, that works well. We sell through Thrivecart. So we don't use the cart in the back of Access Ally. We use Thrivecart. Thrivecart has another system called ConvertBox, which we use as the opt-ins on our website because it's really great for it will change opt-ins on pages, and if somebody's visited the site before, it'll show them a different opt-in. So we've got that. I'm trying to think. We use Vimeo for all of our video hosting through the courses. LastPass has been essential, obviously, for working with a remote team and sharing all of passwords through the team. We used to use webinar software. We now use Zoom for everything. COVID did a lot for Zoom. Nobody had a clue what Zoom was before COVID. I found that I had to, telling people you had to download this software, it was just such this great big hurdle. But since COVID, Zoom is sort of the go-to for all of our webinars. We just obviously have a lot of little things. We use in Live Life Build, we use Read AI on all of our calls so that they all get transcribed. I use Otter a lot for transcripts on the podcast. Our podcast is hosted on Omni. So I'm just trying to think if there's anything else significant there, but that's probably the key ones. So
That's a good tech stack. I love it. Thank you for sharing that. This may be the last question for you. You've been so generous with your time. They're bright and early in Australia, so thank you so much. Look, if you've been in business a long time, we've established that. If you were starting over, how would you go about it? Like knowing everything you know, like what would you do starting in 2024?
That's a really interesting question. I think that I would. It's so hard to say because I love working with homeowners. It really depends what your goals are. Like if my goal was to just make money, I would be working with business owners. I wouldn't work with a homeowner, like a customer-based audience. I'd be working with businesses. And I mean, Live Life Build has overtaken Undercover Architect in its revenue, and it did that very quickly. And so I'd also be doing a monthly recurring revenue model. That's what we have inside Live Life Build with our mastermind. It creates a much more predictable cash flow. I've tried monthly recurring programs with homeowners as one of the ways that we started delivering the course. We did that, several years ago. And I found that people were just joining the program too late because they were trying to work out when to execute their spend on their online learning. So we switched it to just a one-off fee because the sooner the people join in their project, the more beneficial it is for their project overall. I'd be hiring sooner than I did. Hiring a VA, a Filipino VA, is an incredibly affordable resource, and they just enable you to free up and maintain that visibility and consistency in big ways. Those are probably the main things that I would do. So there's probably a lot more learnings that I could share, but yeah, we'd probably be here all day.
Well, Amelia, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm so glad that my client introduced me to your stuff. What you're doing is just incredibly impressive. Good luck to you going forward, and thanks for your time today.
Thanks so much for having me, Jacques. It's been really great to be here and have this kind of conversation that I don't really have with anybody, really. So been really good to dive into the details of it.
And that's going to wrap up our conversation with Amelia Lee. I hope you are inspired by how she turned her architectural expertise into what is now a thriving online education business, helping homeowners create the homes of their dreams. I think her journey shows us that when you lean into your experience and build a system for educating others, you can make a lasting impact, really no matter your niche. To dive deeper into any of the resources that we mentioned in this episode, check out the show notes at oc.show/248. And if you're ready to level up your own online course business, don't forget to check out Next Level Coaching. Head over to oc.show/nextlevel to learn more and to apply. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Online Course Show. Remember to take action on what you heard here today. I'm rooting for you.